She is welcome to Mr. Nitin Nair. Welcome, sir. Welcome, sir, please. Senior Vice President at Open Network for Digital Commerce, ONDC, and leads the South India business of ONDC along with the pan-India responsibility for the mobility domain. He also spearheads the growth of the ONDC network by bringing in network participants, the buyer apps and the seller apps. He has also formerly led the connected cars business of Nissan Motors across Africa, the Middle East, India and Oceania. He has also had a brief stint with Ernst & Young and has been instrumental in the growth of the global ride-hailing app Uber in Kerala. It's an absolute delight to invite our very first speaker for the day, Mr. Nitin Nair.
Morning. It's an absolute delight to be back at TiEcon. Past 10 years, particularly in the early days, maybe 12 to 17, I was pretty much here every year as a volunteer, tagging along with Rajesh, as a panelist many years ago, part of the mentorship sessions, volunteer. So it's good to be back. It's been 5 years that I've not been coming to TiEcon, but coming back has been really great. So thank you for having me, and I'll get started. I have a very tight time frame for the presentation. So yeah, become part of India's digital revolution, right? So what is ONDC and what are our goals? I'll briefly talk about what we're doing, quickly run through the presentation, and happy to take questions in the end, right? So from a India market perspective, there are only about 15,000 sellers who are online currently, right? Across the big businesses largely, and across India, out of the 12 million Kirana stores that we believe exist across India, right? So from that perspective, the penetration is insignificant. Compared to even, other markets like China, where it's about 25%, South Korea 26%, UK 23%, our e-retail penetration in terms of sale is only about 4.3%. So very, very small penetration. Even though we're hearing e-commerce in a big way, the actual penetration is fairly small today, right? And very limited reach to smaller towns and rural areas. So these are some of the problems that ONDC has been tasked to solve, right? So what does that look like, right, in terms of, like a 5-year, direction for us, right? So, I mean, we want to take the gross merchandise value from 4.5 lakhs to about 7.5 lakh crores, right? Pretty much, close to doubling it, right? We want to expand the coverage of user base from 9 crores to about 25 crores, right? I mean, about a 3x growth, right? Also want to reach about 75% of pin codes in terms of coverage. But I think the column on the top right, that's the big one, right? We're only about 15,000 out of 1.2 crore, Kirana stores. We want about 20 lakh of them onboarded. So that's our big bold bet in terms of, making the transformation in e-commerce. About 20 lakh stores we want to bring online in the next 5 years. And we honestly believe that it's going to be a bigger number, but from a goal perspective, that's what we've kind of signed up for, right? So what are the problems or, issues in the value chain that we are trying to solve for? And while, these are bullet points, you'll see through the presentation how these will come to light, right? Choice for sellers to be online, right? So if you look at, any of these e-commerce businesses, whether it is e-commerce, whether it's mobility, whether it is travel, food delivery, you pretty much have 1 or 2 platforms, right? Which kind of, dominate the entire market space. About 65-70% of, e-commerce today is about just 2 platforms, right? So that's one big thing that we want to solve. Ability of retailers and merchants to set their own conditions, right? Another thing that you'll hear for people in these businesses is that it's a one-sided marketplace, right? The big platforms set the terms, and those terms have to be adhered to. I mean, going back to Porter's 5 forces, some of us would have studied in management time, the bargaining power of the supplier is negligible. We want to have some level of change in that. Discoverability of buyers and sellers beyond large e-commerce platforms. If you look at it, we buy on large e-commerce, but a lot of this stuff would be available right next door, right? It's possibly because of the absence of discoverability. Our inability to find out that this goods or services are available next door, which makes us go and buy from the e-commerce platform. And therefore, an opportunity for a business that is right next door is kind of lost. And that's something that ONDC would look forward to solving, right? Opportunities for small e-commerce players to, barriers to stitching across the value chain, right? So, you're a next door store, right? How easy it is for you to orchestrate, say, a home delivery 2 kilometers away, right? It isn't practically feasible for you to, hire a fleet of, 5 delivery boys and have them on standby every time you get an order. However, if you can bring a network together For example, there is a set of 50 delivery boys provided by a fleet company that is available to 500 stores in Palarivata, right? That kind of changes the entire game, saying that, okay, now that store, which otherwise in itself couldn't do this, is able to do this, and technology is slightly fundamental to bringing this together. Moving ahead, so the design of what ONDC is trying to do, as to, essentially revolves around two interrelated principles, unbundling and interoperability, right? So what does this mean? In the digital public goods world, you'll hear this word often, right? What does unbundling mean, right? Today, if you look at the platform-centric businesses that have emerged, the buyer acquisition and the seller acquisition is both, the platform's responsibility, right? Primarily, it's the platforms that drive both the buyer acquisitions, acquiring you and I as consumers, and acquiring the sellers, right? And assuming that the seller is on the platform and the buyer is on the platform, the model is platform-centric, right? And that's something that we want to change, right? And what does that mean? That means that in the ONDC world in the future, we expect the buyer acquisition and the seller acquisition to be two separate businesses, right? There will be a set of companies that will focus just on the consumer side, and there will be a set of businesses that will focus largely on seller acquisition, right? And so how will this operate, right? That's where the second principle comes in, which is interoperability, which is to get, a buyer on a platform A to be able to buy from a seller on platform B, right? And the network comes in between, orchestrating, facilitating, and making this transaction happen. So broadly, unbundling and interoperability, and I have a video in the end that will kind of demonstrate this, that how will we kind of make this happen, right? But fundamental building blocks of unbundling and interoperability are two principles, basis which we will build out the network. So, I know it sounds a bit esoteric and a bit, slightly different from what we are used to. Our mental models don't easily absorb this, right? So we try and demystify it by saying, think email, right? There is an SMTP protocol, right? Your email may be on Gmail, mine may be on Yahoo, mine may be on my company email platform, right? But when you send an email, you don't actually sit down and figure out how will it reach there, right? As long as the email ID is correct, right? From your email client to my email client as a sender and a receiver, the email moves seamlessly, right? The same thing if you look at on the right, there's a buyer on top, right? There is a buyer application, which is the consumer application. Through the ONDC network, it orchestrates a transaction with the seller application and the seller on the other side. And the most important thing here is the buyer and the seller application are not a single platform. It could be any of the buyer applications talking to any of the seller applications in that sense. And therefore, the opportunities kind of start to build up for everybody, and the unbundling of the network starts to happen. So again, just giving you another view of this, right? Today, if you look at it, you have providers on the left, right, which are your sellers, and there are a set of platforms, right? You could have platforms in e-commerce, you have platforms in mobility, food delivery. These are all individual platforms which singularly make you interact with your particular seller, right? You go to the food delivery platform to talk to the restaurant, you go to the mobility platform to get a cab, you go to the e-commerce platform to buy a shirt, right? But these are all platforms in between. However, if you move forward, and can we change this in a way that the platform starts interacting on a common network, which means you're a buyer on a platform, say a food delivery platform, as long as it permits, you're able to order a vehicle on that because the platform permits this, right? Because the buyer and the seller are no more together or no more closed on a single platform, right? And that's broadly what we are set out to accomplish, right? So this is a slightly complex representation of, what ONDC is, but just to tell you who are the actors, right? So there are buyers on top, there are buyer apps, there are sellers, seller-side apps, there are all the sellers in the middle, because the seller apps, so to say, could be just technology platforms without being in the actual business of selling anything to the consumer, right? The Kirana store continues to sell, right? And then, we may bring in open credit enablement network, and on the right, you'll see the ONDC infrastructure, which is registry, network policies, etc., which kind of help orchestrate this entire flow, yeah? So moving ahead, the opportunities are pretty big. These are all different players that we are at different level of conversations, and this is an illustrative diagram. Please don't take it as a meaning that all of these companies are on board. I have a separate slide coming up on, the people that are on board. But it just opens up the market for, buyers, sellers and logistic companies to come together on the ONDC network, and therefore, complex transactions being orchestrated, right? So, the aim broadly is to democratize multiple domains across sectors, right? There is electronics, there is mobility, there is fashion, there is home and kitchen, there is agriculture, wholesale. Every domain where there is a buyer versus a seller conversation, right? Where there are platforms involved, the digital public infrastructure of ONDC will attempt to democratize it, make it easier for both parties to be discoverable, and at the same time make it easier for both parties to be, operating over diverse platforms. Yeah. Moving ahead, so let's take a very simple example, right? Somebody from Delhi has a short-term assignment in Kerala, right? You need to buy a suitcase, you probably go and buy it on Amazon, you buy flight tickets on Make My Trip, you book a service apartment on housing.com, you buy a basic Malayalam language knowledge kit on some other platforms, you want to buy a Google search, right? So all of this is today, right? We foresee that there will be buyer apps which will try and bring all of this and orchestrate it in one place where you're able to add a suitcase to the cart, buy a flight ticket, add a service department to your checkout process, buy a digital, 10 lesson introductory course in Malayalam, and there is one basic checkout, right? All of this in one place from a buyer perspective, right? And all these seller platforms coming together and providing you different features through a single interface, right? So this is an important slide. So what's in it for a buyer, right? Buyer as a consumer, right? There's a single platform access across all domains. You get to see sellers that you're otherwise not constrained by, today if you go to a platform, you're constrained by what the platform offers and not what, is available in the marketplace next to you or what is available across India, right? There is a unified experience, I spoke about it. Wider options for price, delivery and add-ons, right? Today the platform says, okay, there is express delivery and there is normal delivery, right? There is no option to say that, okay, I'm not in a hurry to buy this, but I want a good discount, right? Or I'm in a very big hurry to buy this and I'm willing to pay extra, right? All of those comes. Hyper-local fulfillment, right? What the network will also do is, since all the stores in your neighborhood are digitized and available on the network, as far as possible, we will reduce the network footprint by bringing the transaction closer to you, right? This is where the real advantage to the smaller sellers will come in, that if the good or service is available in your vicinity, in your periphery, it will come from there rather than from a warehouse in Bangalore or Delhi or Jamshedpur or wherever, right? So I think the key, and the last point is the key. So the key differentiator for the buyer would be the buying experience, right? How will the buyer apps sort of come together and orchestrate a complex set of transactions together? And anybody aspiring to be a buyer app, we believe that's going to be the key differentiator. Rather than price, rather than, the seller network that you build, rather than the P capital you have that helps you, bring all of this together, it is the buyer experience that will become critical in building the differentiation. So what is the advantage for the seller and for some of the sellers in the room, some of the entrepreneurs in the room, right? Discoverability by the entire buyer universe. So I'm going to make a key point. It's not on the slide, but think of it this way, right? Today you're on a platform. You leave the platform, you leave your entire profile on the platform, right? You go to another platform, it's day zero, transaction zero, and first rating zero, right? You start from fresh, right? Whereas in the ONDC world, the seller becomes an entity that is portable across the network, right? You carry your profile. You may be on Seller App 1 today, you move to Seller App 5, you as an individual, your profile as a company is portable, and therefore you're never at the mercy of any platform to decide or terms, how this is going to work out for you. So let me try and take a simple example here. Think about telecoms, right? At least some of the senior folks in the room will remember, right? It was all BSNL, in our childhood. You made a phone call, you waited, you signed up, there was a queue, and till about 30 million numbers we kind of waited for to make a phone call from us to a friend, to a family. There was a phone call that was always on the BSNL network, right? Or at that time it was DOT, right? Then came the private companies and we could call, other landline phones, we could call mobile phones, we could do pagers, right? So we started to have some basic interoperability. The market grew, it became big, we all had, great 10-digit phone numbers, but then the other problem started to crop up, that this number became very core to our identity, but, and we are not able to do anything with the service provider because this number is fundamental to our identity, right? It's on our bank account, it's on anything and everything, and progressively the dependency on the phone number became, pretty high. That's when somebody said, okay, why is this phone number stuck to the telco, right? Why can't I make this portable, right? And that's another way to visualize what we want to do in the seller ecosystem, that no seller should be dependent on a seller platform to be permanently, attached at the hip and not be able to move. because of the history of transactions, because of the volume of business that has been transacted earlier, the seller identity becomes unique on the network and portable on the network, right? Of course, there is, other, advantages such as disintermediation, but that's for a later time. The other opportunity is for technology companies, right? Suddenly, you're looking at, people who can help Kirana stores come online, people who can help logistics, small logistic businesses come in. These all become potential SaaS opportunities for technology companies to come in and say that, look, I'll provide a platform, I'll help onboard 500 stores in Cochin in one neighborhood, right? And that becomes a business. And his only value proposition to these stores is, I bring you online and I support you with the transaction, but I don't really hold anything on demand. Demand will come from, say, PhonePe or Paytm or any of these apps. So there is a technology company locally which is able to fulfill it. So this again becomes a great opportunity for entrepreneurs, having the appetite to try something new. Moving ahead, so some of the things we hear, and this was important, right? We are an open network, right? We do not put any restrictions on who wants to come as a seller app, who wants to come as a buyer app, a logistics app, both, all three, absolutely neutral. We are not a central intermediary, right? Think of the internet, right? The internet doesn't control anything, right? We all plug in and then we start operating and then we are in business, right? The internet doesn't decide that are you able to do this? Can you talk to this website or not? The internet opens up. As long as the URL is working, as long as the mobile app is connecting, a connection will be established and a communication will be established, right? We are an enabler, right? We are not trying to, so I think it's very important to also highlight that the ONDC will not have a consumer-facing face, right? You will not be able to download an ONDC app to do any of the transaction. We continue to be in the shadows, we continue to be just a network, enabling existing future apps to have a conversation, right? And it is a market and community-led initiative. When I talk about who are the companies behind us, the entities behind us, that will be clear, right? So ONDC is not an application or a platform. We're not a central intermediary. We are also not a medium to help digitize businesses, right? The network will be, we will have other entrepreneurs, other companies that will come and do the digitization bit. Once they digitize, the network enables them to transact. We're also not a regulator. This is an often asked question that, are you kind of going to go and start defining rules of how the e-commerce companies will operate? The answer is no, we are not a regulator, right? Very clear direction on this, right? So it's a truly made in India digital revolution for the world. And I think what I'd like to highlight is, it is a one-of-a-kind initiative, right? There have been several conversations on digital public goods, digital infrastructure worldwide. But ONDC is one of a kind in terms of what's happening worldwide, right? This is the first country in the world where something like this is being attempted. With all humility, we're still trying to learn. We are still trying to figure this out. But we have a truly big, ambitious roadmap of what we want to accomplish, right? This is our advisory council, some big names there, and great guidance that we get from the folks who are kind of orchestrating this. While as an operational team we go out, this is our advisory council that comes together and kind of supports us and guides us in our mission, right? So this is our journey. We started off approximately a year back. So ONDC incidentally got incorporated as a formal entity on 31st December 21. So we are about 11 months old, right? We are currently live in about 85 cities as an alpha, right? And our beta is live in Bangalore in a closed group of about 20 pin codes, right? So the testing is on and we are currently kind of getting started, right? So we are a Section 8 company, which means we are structurally set up as a not-for-profit. Our shareholders cannot be provided dividend. If we generate any profit, we will have to upload back into the network. There is no profit motive for the company, right? And these are national level scale companies which have established, various businesses which precede ONDC with similar missions, right? You've got NSDL there, NSC there, you've got NPCI there, which did the entire UPI stack, so on and so forth. So ONDC is going to be a similar company, which being Section 8 means we are not for profit, right? So we have a healthy pipeline. That number 22 live has actually changed. This is, I think, about 3 days back. There are 13 advanced stages and about 300 applications underway. So the first row is what is live today in our alpha and beta testing. So on the seller side, you have some, marquee names like UShop, Innorbits, etc. On the buyer side, these are the big consumer apps, such as Paytm, PhonePe, Kotak, etc. Logistics, we have Dunzo, Loadshare, ShipRocket Live, and a whole bunch of other apps, across marquee names, marquee platforms in India, which are currently in the pipeline to, join the ONDC network. So then joining the network essentially involves two parts. There is a network participant agreement that that they need to sign, which is a common agreement irrespective of which side of the business, buying or selling, you come in. And then there is a technology integration. So I think the core concept to understand is the ONDC protocol, right, which simplifies this, requires all platforms to integrate with us once, right? And why is that once a very key word? After that, you don't need to do any technical integration with any network participant, right? The protocol enables a conversation, and therefore, even for existing businesses, which, you know, the technology folks will understand, which use API connections with, say, if you have 20 partners, right? Think about a world that you only connect with ONDC and the 20 partners are on the other side of the ONDC network. So that's also a sort of transformation that is coming in, right? So this is our current footprint. This changes daily. This is a couple of days back. 85 plus cities, 520 plus sellers. I think just in Bangalore, we have now crossed the number of about 350. So this number is definitely got updated, and it's a moving target. We add sellers, buyers, and applications on a daily basis, right? So I think this is broadly it. We're happy to have more and more entrepreneurs come on board, more and more companies which look at the network possibilities and see what they want to do, right? And like I said, you don't need to do everything for everybody on the network, right? You know, we're seeing very, very interesting business models emerge. Without being specific, I'll give you an example. A bank tells us that about 10 to 12% of all transactions, the airline transactions, are a cancellation in India, right? And anybody who's had an airline ticket cancellation knows what a complex orchestration airline to your platform to you, and it's a 4-week time for which the money is stuck, right? So banks are coming forward and say that I will take on this transaction upfront and offer a refund upfront, and it is for me to then collect it, right? There are companies which want to play in the high margin, electronics e-commerce space. There are companies saying, no, I want to play in and develop a niche in the fashion space because pricing is less challenging there, and so on and so forth. So there are companies that are offering new business models. There are companies that did not have, consumer footprint in India that are getting on the consumer side. There are companies that were both buyer and seller saying that I will only be a seller, I'll get the big apps to bring me demand, and therefore bring in core competence and niche to our business rather than be spread apart. So, we're reachable on team@ONDC.org. Please feel free to just drop in an email. Somebody will get back to you. I'm reachable directly on my email ID below, and happy to support as many businesses come online and be a part of this digital revolution. Thank you. I have a short video to show you a sample transaction. I hope the audio works and this is clear, but let me just make an attempt.
Hello everyone. Today we'll be seeing a demo of a cascaded transaction in ONDC through the retailer logistics networks in Delhi. In this transaction, Paytm is the buyer side app and there are two seller side apps. One is Cellmetric Private Limited and the other is GoFrugal. A total of 6 merchants have been onboarded by these two seller apps, selling more than 4,000 items in the city. The logistics provider is LoadShare. Today, we're doing this demo from the customer's perspective on a buyer side app. So let's say I'm a user and I want some groceries from my local store. I'll go to Paytm buyer side app, which is on the ONDC network. I will navigate to ONDC on the application. ONDC has 3 categories to choose from: food and beverages, grocery, and fashion. I go to the search option and search for Maggi using the app. Paytm searches for this product in its local cache for a better user experience. It is temporarily sourced through the ONDC gateway and broadcast to all seller-side apps in the retail network which are in my location. I can see Maggi items from retailers connected to different seller-side apps. I choose any Maggi item, say in this case from Merchant Chaurasia store, through the seller-side app called GoFrugal. So I choose a few items from this merchant and add them to my cart. The app then asks me to select the delivery address where the items are to be shipped. At the checkout, I can see the delivery address, product details, and breakup of the amount payable. The amount payable includes MRP, discount offered, selling price, and shipping fee. Logistics is fixed at 50 rupees. I can view the return and cancellation policy before confirming the order. I'm happy with this, so I'll confirm my order by clicking on Proceed to Pay. Now the buyer won't see this on the buyer side app, but in the background, the following steps take place. Merchant will get a confirmation on his seller side app in this case Go Frugal. As soon as I'd initialized the checkout and confirmation on my order, the seller side app broadcasts a request for available delivery agents for this order, again through ONDC network. In this case, LoadShare, a logistics provider, accepts the request for a delivery agent. After my order is confirmed by the merchant, it goes ahead and confirms its order with the logistics provider. LoadShare picks up my order from the merchant, who sends me a notification saying that the order is underway. Now, I will be able to track my order through ONDC. Please note, the buyer-side app Paytm will show the live tracking status of a delivery agent from the logistics provider LoadShare via seller-side app, in this case Go Frugal. I can see that LoadShare delivery agent has been assigned to the order and order has been dispatched. After my order is delivered, I will see the status updated accordingly in the Paytm app.
Cool. So that was an example of a transaction, as you'll see, right? It started with the buyer on the Paytm app, going, searching on the network, finding Chaurasia store, and then placing an order which was being on the Go Frugal platform, which is the seller side app, and then through load-shared logistics, there is a delivery that happens to you, right? So this is an example where multiple people come together and the network kind of facilitates and enables that transaction. So with that, I take a pause here, happy to take any questions.
When you work through multiple, you've got a seller app, you've got the buyer app working through them, how does, if you want to send something back, and how does the refund system work?
So there is, on the ONDC protocol, there is a process for the payment to move in terms of how the financial terms have been agreed, and that's on the protocol itself. Plus there is a resettlement process, a reconciliation settlement process for the money to be transferred, because there are at least three or four entities that need to be paid, right? There is a buyer app that collected the money, there is a seller app which will get the money first and then it will goes to the seller. Also there is a logistic fee. So there is on the protocol a settlement process built. Additionally, there is an integrated grievance management process also for anything that needs to be returned, any complaint, there is a way. And the way ONDC acts is that the primary conversation on any complaint is between the buyer and the seller app, which kind of talk and resolve it. If that doesn't resolve, there is an arbitration process that ONDC kind of takes over, right? And then if it still doesn't resolve, then the law of the land. So at a structural level, it has been thought through, but it is under implementation.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Sumit. I'm running a retail technology company. My question is, I got two questions. One, since you said that any user profile is a common, so that people can log in with one username and ID. So is it mean that ONDC platform will save all the username and passwords and profiles in this thing? That is the first thing. Second thing is, how do you measure whether the supplier is a genuine one, or because if we are talking about a pool of millions of suppliers. So how does, as a buyer, make sure that the seller what I'm suggesting or opting is genuine or not? 2%. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think those are fairly in-depth questions, and great to hear people think far ahead in terms of how this will come together. So don't think of it as a login, right, which ONDC will do an authentication of a user, but think of it as you are today having a Kirana store on you, right? The Kirana store doesn't feel happy to work with you. He has a unique ID which he can use to work with another seller app, another retail app, right? And I think that's the key to think of it, that today if you're on an e-commerce platform, right, if you leave the e-commerce platform, like I said earlier, it's a fresh setup on a new e-commerce platform, right? I think my favorite example from my Uber days is the Uber driver is 10,000 rides and 4.94 rating. He leaves Uber, it is day 0, trip 0, rating 0, right? And that kind of becomes the key thing in terms of, transferability or portability, right? Going back to your second question, sorry, could you just repeat the second question?
The seller, how do you make sure that the seller is
Okay, the seller is genuine, right? So there are a couple of parts here, right? So one, I think in some form the seller app which onboards the seller is responsible, right? The second thing is that we are also building an entire rating capability where between the buyers, sellers, etc., there will be network ratings which will be exposed to the buyer when he makes the decision, right? Beyond a point, you can only validate whether, so the basic validations exist, right? Thanks to the India stack. I think Aruna ma'am spoke yesterday about Aadhaar, the GST validations, the GST, the FISI, depending on the industry. Those validations will happen, right? That's at the seller side itself before a merchant or a store or a shop is onboarded. Those validations happen. So it's not like, anybody can just come on board the network. So the seller apps do that. And then on top of that, in terms of performance, there is a network and a rating and all those other parameters come in, which helps you as an individual buyer to take a call that which, seller do you want to purchase from?
Nitin, I'm Kumar here. I'm here. Very nice presentation, very informative. Two questions, Nitin. You told by September 2022, this year, the beta version is being done in Bangalore. When is the All India, when it will go to the All India level in terms of the launch? Number one. Number two, as a buyer, do I have a choice to select my logistics partner?
Sure, MSC sir, thank you for those questions. So I think it's a progressing launch. We're going live at Delhi soon and then progressively, right? In terms of specific timelines, there are many factors involved, right? Because it's not just about saying ONDC is live, right? It's having enough buyers and sellers in every domain to be available, right? So today, when I say Bangalore is live, we're largely doing food delivery and grocery, right? Two domains. There is mobility coming, there is travel coming, there is agri coming. We just had our first big transaction on agri yesterday, right? So it's a progressive thing, many domains, many markets and beyond, right? Sure. The second question. Logistics, yes. So logistics, thank you. So on logistics, the both options exist, right? But typically it's a seller side discretion whether it wants to offer third party logistics, right? And there also, there are parties who say we will do off network logistics, people who have had experience in doing this for many years and have very good agreements, volume discounts already present with logistics provider. The network doesn't enforce that, right? The network doesn't enforce that you need to be on the network at least today. You could choose a non-logistics partner like in this transaction, or you could work with an off-logistics partner if you already have a relationship and you're working with somebody. Yeah, cool. Okay, I'm told that I have to close here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And now may I invite Ms. Anisha Cherian, the President, to please give away a little something to our speaker as a thank you. Welcome, ma'am. And thank you, Nitin, sir, for taking the time to outline the nuances involved, how those two are merged, also giving us a video that delineates the nuances and intricacies involved.